Welcome to the Political Trenches, local government at work. Today, we are here to unpack the key issue of leadership in this new world, global and local order. To discuss this, we are joined by Catherine McCook, who is a city councillor, leadership and performance coach, and board member of the Riseup Society of Alberta. With a background in criminal justice and training in interviewing and interrogation, she brings a sharp, multidimensional approach to leadership and system change. As the founder of the Elan Project, Catherine empowers women, supporters, leaders, and consults organizations on fostering people-first cultures that drive engagement, innovation, and long-term success. A fierce advocate for women in leadership and workplace well-being, Catherine believes in disrupting the status quo for good, breaking down entrenched barriers, reshaping leadership norms, and redefining success in ways that prioritize people over rigid hierarchies. With that, welcome to the Political Trenches, Catherine.
Hello, welcome. Thank you.
I'm going to
Excited to
start
be.
off. I'm going to start off with a quick, simple question. How did the project come about, Catherine?
Well, I think it was, a combination of things. So as you said, my background is in interviewing and interrogation, and I worked corporate in security and investigations, and so that's very, rigid, and interrogations are one thing, but I found where my strengths lie, and in being on city council as well, is creating those connections. And when I went out to stores or when I did audits and stuff, that was really my strength. And I figured out that I was essentially coaching people without actually coaching. And then I ran into a lot of difficult leaders who were not willing to bend or learn, and a lot of leaders who actually didn't know about leadership and learn about leadership, because I think too often we do that. We throw people into positions and we don't equip them with the tools to be successful in some of those positions, and leadership is one of them. So then that kind of lead me down the leadership and performance coaching path, and the socio-economic consulting piece a little bit, because as we're seeing today, people's socioeconomic status and all those factors impact businesses, employees, customers. And so I think helping businesses have an understanding of that is important.
Where'd the name come from? What's the significance of Elan in all of this?
Yeah, so that one, I was really thinking about what do I want it to encompass? And Elan is really about like momentum and movement. And I think that's part of it. So it really essentially is a movement. I want organizations and leaders to think about people and bring humanity back into leadership, and support more women into leadership, and just in workplaces in general as well, make them more friendly to a variety of people, not necessarily just the structures that have been built for men by men. So um, yeah, I felt that that really kind of encompassed it.
So there's some irony in two men interviewing you about this, I suppose. It's just kind of funny on this. If we get back to it a little bit more, I was looking at the website, of course, and you've said in there you want to create a space where women can be empowered and inspired to achieve their full potential by providing them with the tools, resources, and support they need to succeed in all aspects of their lives, and is rooted in how they define success. Can you tell me a little bit what that means to you, all of that?
So I think, and I went down this path myself as well. Society has kind of shaped what success should look like. It's often financial. That is success for you. Or you have a family and then now you have financial success. And I think for a lot of people, and especially women, today, that is shifting. Success to them might be, having good mental health and having good supports around them, and just being able to kind of live a life of leisure, or a more simple life, and not necessarily always, striving for that and doing being a girl boss or whatever it may be. And I think for a long time, so many women were pushed in that direction because we felt like we had to. But now women are redefining what success looks like for them. I think honestly, a lot of people are, not just women. But obviously for myself, I focus a lot on women, but I think that's a big part for a lot of people, especially as we have so many pressures today and everyone's kind of in that rat race and you're on the hamster wheel and so many people are like, how do I get off? And so just helping people understand that you can and that success can look different for everyone and that's okay.
I'm just going to jump in for a second, and I hate bringing him up in any context, but I think I have to. Donald Trump. Donald Trump has made a sort of literally the last 50 days or whenever you're listening to this, 60 days or 80 days, about we don't hire diversity, equity, and inclusion anymore, which women traditionally fall under. We hire more on their merits and their actual resume. And there is a culture out there, and I'm going to sort of paint a very broad stroke. And if for anyone who's about to send emails, please send them to me, not Ian, not Catherine, to me, that will say men should be hired because women are too emotional. Their leadership style is too emotional, and they are just DEI hires. For your project, for someone who works with women, who empowers women to take those leadership roles, how do we combat back against the narrative that we have to hire the best and we can't just hire a woman because it's a woman?
Yeah. Lot to unpack there. I mean,
throwing the bomb in and walking away.
I love it. But I think the first part is we have to take away the assumption that women aren't the best. You know, too often, and I think that's part of it, is women face that credibility gap, kind of, right? So we operate on the assumption that men are often promoted based on potential, on what we think they're going to be able to do, where women have to prove that they have to be able to do these things and above that before they're even considered. So we have to be extraordinary before we're even considered to be put in a position. So the assumption that women who are currently in any sort of leadership, higher government position, that they didn't earn it and that it's not by merit is ridiculous. And in addition to that, I think it goes back to bias, right? The assumption that women haven't earned their spot. It's just when we consider DEI, we're considering that people doing the hiring or people considering who they want to put into leadership positions may have bias. I know even back in the day when, bless my grandmother, but she said I had a female OB and she was like, oh my goodness. She's like, how do you feel comfortable with that? And I was like, what? What do you mean? How do I feel kind of like? And she's like, well, do you think she's as qualified? I'm like, she went to the same school as the other doctors. Why would she not be as qualified? And I said, and she's also had children. So to me, she's even more qualified because she knows what it's like to go through that. So I think really considering our own bias, and that is hard today to have people step back and have them consider what their own bias is and how some of the information they're taking in may be influencing how they view people. Did I answer that clearly enough, or did I miss one of the parts of the question?
Nope, you hit it
I'm
out of
sure
the
it'll be
mark.
fine. Yeah, thanks. Since we are a local government show, I wanted to try to draw the pieces together a little bit and see what you see are the parallels maybe between your work with the Elan Project and your work as a City of Beaumont city councillor. How do these two work together?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, and it's part of how I just answered, how we consider leadership and what we consider in leadership. I think too often we maybe focus on, especially when it comes to government and stuff, it ends up focusing on, it becomes a popularity contest a little bit. and it becomes who's the loudest voice and who has the most connections rather than who's the most competent. So it's almost like it's flipped sometimes when it comes to government. We don't always do it as a meritocracy when it comes to government. It's often some of those more performative things that we place an emphasis on rather than the competencies that some people have. You look at some people, you know, even in the Democrats, you look at Jasmine Crockett, for example. She's one of the ones, if we're going to dig into the US a little bit, who's very vocal right now, but she is a very educated, very accomplished woman, more so than a lot of the other people that she's surrounded with. So I think pushing people to understand how elevating women in leadership balances things out. And I know, Chris, you talked to, you know, about how women are considered emotional. I think what we're seeing today is proving that that's not really necessarily the case. That women aren't necessarily always the emotional ones. And part of it is women bring that humanity piece back into leadership, where we help people consider everyone and how some of the policies and the things we put forward impacts everyone and not just certain groups. And so I think that's really important. And that's kind of how it connects to the Elan Project. And I think, you know, with my company now too, it is a little unnerving seeing what's happening down south. You know, I'm pushing for this change and to have humanity back in. And if essentially what's happening there is they're just ripping it all out. So it's really, you know, trying to educate people on why it's important for us to still have it.
Mm-hmm. You made reference too to having a family and other things that you're doing. So you're a city councillor, you have a family, you're running the Elan Project. How do you balance all of those things and maintain your own well-being?
Yeah, it's hard. And first and foremost, like I have to say, I have the most supportive husband. So, and when we talk about bias and stuff like that, he is not. He is out there and he's like, you go for it. You speak the loudest. You do what you have to do. And so that's right. That's
Snap,
right.
snap.
So yeah, he is. And so I think first of all, that's key. You have to have some people in your arena who are your champions and who are there to support you no matter what. And so, you know, as he's coming home from work and I'm running out the door, you know, I'm not thinking about, you know, here's a list, this is what you have to do, this is how you have to feed the kids, this is, you know, he's got it. And so it alleviates some of that mental load for me, which is super helpful. And I think shutting off social media sometimes, you know, some of that is key for your mental well-being because you can definitely get sucked in. And just being really organized is also a big thing. Like everything is structured. But it's challenging for sure. There's no doubt about it.
Right. The ranks, albeit slowly, the ranks of women among local government leaders are growing across the country. Are you seeing any parallels between that and maybe growth in your own business? Are you getting any of your women colleagues reaching out to you to ask more about what you're up to?
Yeah, for sure. I do have more women colleagues asking. I think too, there is, with what we're seeing down south, we are seeing a little bit of hesitation with people, I think, especially women. And especially a lot of the hesitation is around the online piece, how to handle some of that criticism. As we know, in local government, in government in general, women often bear the brunt of the harassment, and it's often more severe in the comments that they get, and more prevalent. So they get it a lot more often. So I think definitely more women are looking to have an understanding of what they're getting into before they get into it. So I'm certainly always open and happy to talk with any women who are looking to get into politics, because I think really having an understanding from someone who's been in it is really important. And that goes back to that coaching piece, you know, coaching even through the transition of becoming an elected official. that is a shift and that is a transition. And it is not always an easy one. And for local government, especially a lot of smaller cities, you're part-time. And so a lot of women, a lot of candidates have full-time jobs in addition to that. So now you're juggling your council duties, your full-time job, and if you have a family, you have that as well. So it's that transition piece and understanding how to balance all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and busy people, I suspect, are doing other volunteer things as well, and kids' activities too. So my last question, though, before I turn it over to Chris, is kind of what's next for you as you see this unfolding and growing a little bit? What's next for the Elan Project? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, it's hard because, like I said, there was some hesitation, not hesitation in the Elan Project, but I think now more than ever, it's a business that's needed. It's something that we have to look at and we have to consider, what does it look like if we take women out of leadership and everything completely? How does that change things? I think there's been a lot of really great progress with having women on councils and women in leadership in general. And so I think it's important to think about that. And for myself, I also think about how does the Elan Project really connect with local government and elevating more human-centric leadership practices in local government, where we talk about so much of politics is very performative and stuff like that. And I think we need to get back as to, how do we have impact rather than just performative, what's going to get me elected next. And so I think about how the Elan Project comes back into that, bringing that human-centric piece back in our decision making.
Sure, thanks.
I wanted to pick up on that statement just there. And you talk about how the Elan Project is needed at this time in the world. And you also spoke in your conversation with Ian about reshaping leadership norms and redefining success within today's society. What does a truly people-centric model of leadership look like in 2025? Because I can imagine there might be someone in Nova Scotia listening to this and saying that this is what they define leadership as and what they define people-centric leadership as. What does Catherine McCook, the founder, the CEO of the Elan Project, define as truly people-centric leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest part is thinking about people first. When big things happen as it pertains to leadership or leaders need to make decisions, we automatically revert to the policies, the numbers, the data, which is all obviously very important. These are all things we have to consider. We can't dismiss that. But what gets lost in a lot of those conversations and a lot of those leadership practices and how leadership is very hierarchical and, very structured and intense, we lose how do these decisions impact our people? And I think we're seeing that through organizations as well as through society, that some of these decisions that are made through strictly policy lenses and strictly, financial lenses, we're losing how all of this shakes out and then actually impacts people. We're seeing some of the highest rates of burnout in organizations. And, the lunchtime webinar isn't cutting it. So we need to think about how some of the decision making we're doing is impacting the people in our organizations. And so it's bringing that back to the focus, and it's through all of your interactions. So even creating, psychological safety where people feel comfortable coming forward and saying, I don't agree with this. This might not be okay. And this is why. And instead of, getting your hand slapped or saying, I don't need to listen to that because I'm the leader or I'm the manager or whatever it may be, it's about, okay, tell me more about that. Let's talk about that. I had a client who, they were struggling with someone that they had just recently brought on, and they said, we've given them all the training, we've done everything we could with them, and they aren't getting it. So I think we're just going to need to cut them loose. And my first question was, have you sat down and had a conversation with them? And they said, well, yeah, we've been why aren't you getting this? And I'm like, no, actually talk to them. How are things going with you? how are things going on with you outside of work? Because so much of what happens sometimes outside of work impacts people in their jobs, and we pretend like it doesn't. And so they had the conversation, and sure enough, there was other things, and they were able to, with some help, they were able to kind of work through it. But it didn't even dawn on them to have that conversation as to like, are things okay? So I think some of that is really important.
You've spoken openly about the toxicity that is in social media, and how you have to just turn off your cell phone at the end of the night. And municipalities, as this is the municipal show, let's sort of throw the municipal question here. Municipalities have been struggling with the changes that social media has had on their culture in their output of information. We are seeing more and more municipalities leaving social media networks like X. We are seeing more and more municipal leaders, whether it be men and women, leaving social media altogether. If you want to have a conversation, email me. If you want to have a conversation, let's meet for coffee. But we're not having that conversation on social media anymore. What strategies do you recommend, and have you seen put into place for leaders to actively combat that toxicity while not losing I'm a proponent against getting off social media, and I'll be the first to admit that social media has been the downfall of our civilized society. Again, send your emails to Chris Brown, not to Ian or Catherine. How do we actively combat that toxicity and not lose that outlet where so many people seem to be on, but want to be that place where people can get that town square information from? Because if we start losing those people, then we're sort of throwing up our hands, aren't we, as leaders, saying, okay, we've given up and we want to go back to the 1980s metrics where we put the notice in the newspaper and that's all we can do as leaders, because that's where the most civilized discourse is.
Yeah, great question. I think part of it is, I mean, some of it goes back to that psychological safety piece, and even within your own councils. So you have to be comfortable enough within your own council to be able to speak up and to be able to deal with some of that. And I think you should stand up for your colleagues as well. I think too often right now within councils too, it's, me versus you, rather than, listen, we're on a council together, and while we may disagree on certain policies and how we implement certain things, we're still on this council together. So instead of going out to the public and maybe even further perpetuating the me versus you piece, let's stand up for your colleagues. If somebody is calling someone out, stand up for your colleagues. That's inappropriate. You should not speak like that to my colleagues. And I think something I've done, and you kind of mentioned it, Chris, is, I don't think you can totally remove yourself from social media if you're in the public eye, if you're in local government. You have to still at least see what's going on, see what people are talking about. I've mostly tried to engage people offline in the sense a little bit, where if I see that they're really fired up on a certain issue, I will message them directly and say, hey, I see that, you're really upset about something about this. Sometimes getting together one-on-one can be very beneficial. I'd love to meet for coffee, or if it's more convenient for you, we can jump on a quick phone call, and try and engage them that way. Just pull them out of that kind of town square mob mentality kind of area, because that's where the productive conversations happen. That's where you can really say, this is what's happening. And, sometimes residents will change your mind, and sometimes you'll change theirs as well. And sometimes, a lot of the times, they're not willing to engage. And that's their decision as well. But I think you still have to have that willingness to engage. It's just in a different way now. And it's not necessarily jumping on the long thread that is piling on about certain decisions that are made. I think it's trying to pull them off of that to have an understanding as to, okay, what are truly your pain points here? Because sometimes when you start to talk to people as well, the initial thing that they're angry about is not necessarily what their entire pain point is. So it's having those conversations, and luckily, locally, most of us, we have that ability to do that. I think provincially, federally, it's a little bit harder, but in local government, we still have that opportunity. So we have to do it. But you have to call out the dysfunction at the structural level as well. Leaders have to be willing to make kind of those structural changes, whether it's through, audits or process overhauls or whatever it may be. And then we have to refuse to align ourselves with people who fall into that really toxic culture. You need to stand up and say, this is not okay. I'm willing to engage with you, but not like that.
There's a meme that comes to mind, and I know we should never talk about memes, but I think it might not even be a meme. It might be an actual like cartoon from the 1990s, where it shows a leader. A true leader is one who works with their team to bring things forward, not telling the team what to do and move things forward. Through your time, whether it be as a municipal councillor, whether it be as in your organization that you're in right now, how has your leadership style transformed? Because we often talk from whenever I talk to municipal leaders, and I'm assuming you yourself, Catherine, and yourself, Ian, have also had these conversations where walk the walk. Don't tell me what to do. Like, show me that you're actually going to participate in this movement. So, how has your leadership transformed over the last 4 years, over the last 10 years, to show people that Catherine's walking the walk right now? She is showing that this is how a truly human-centric leadership style can work.
Yeah, I think for myself, especially my background is criminal justice. That's initially kind of the path that I led. And so very like rigid, very reactive type of leadership, um, traditional type of leadership. And so that was the path that I started. And then kind of when I got out of school, I worked in nonprofit and I worked with a lot of people who are a lot of vulnerable populations, a lot of people who were recently released. And that helped to change my perspective because you understand that the processes some people have to go through to try and just pull themselves out a little bit are incredibly difficult. And we make it very difficult for people to try and get ahead. So that started to soften myself a little bit. Then I did more interviews and interrogation stuff. I jumped on the corporate side. And even through that, I would interview people and they're crying and stuff like that at the end. And you see the humanity in them. And while they made a bad decision and while they may not have done something right, you still see the humanity piece in them. And so, and that softened me as well. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to go back and see the humanity piece. And it goes back to listening and asking questions instead of putting up that wall, that defensiveness that I'm the manager, I'm the leader, I'm the politician. You need to listen to me. It's about the listening piece. And I've heard this even in my own community where people have said, you're not a leader, you're a representative, so you need to act like a representative and just listen to me. And I think that that is a failure in politics right now, is too often people are chasing that next election and we're not making decisions for impact and for long-term sustainability. You're making them because you want to get reelected. And I've always said I will always make the decisions that I think are best for my community, even though they may not be popular. There are many decisions that I've made, finger shaking as you're going to vote. I truly, in my heart of heart, believe that long term, that was the right decision to make. And so I think that's kind of how my leadership journey has evolved in the sense that I've seen things from both sides. I've seen it, where privilege can take you. And I've also seen it where, some people are trying their hardest to get by with certain things. And I see structural barriers in place. And so I have that understanding. And so I try to bring that lens back into leadership a little bit.
Your organization looks to disrupt the status quo when it comes to leadership style. For municipal leaders who are listening to this, for CAOs who might be listening to this, what is the first step that they should take today if they're listening to this to disrupt that status quo and embrace a more sustainable and impactful leadership style for their municipality and their community?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's kind of doing like an audit, leadership audit or a friction audit. And I do those through my organization, through my business. But even if you didn't want to hire someone to do it, you could do it on a basic level and just have an understanding as to, where you're at. It's hard to fix anything or to change anything if you don't know where you're at, don't have an understanding of where you want to go, or if you haven't measured it. So I think you have to think about, especially in local government today, where are the breakdowns in trust in our communities? So why are we losing trust? That's obviously a conversation as a whole in government. But I think, at the local level, you can maybe pick apart at it a little bit better and understand, can I fix this? Where can I fix it? How can I influence it? As well as, what's the cause of some of the friction? Is it the friction between council and community? Is it the friction between council and administration? Where are some of these breakdowns and some of these barriers we might be facing? And then, are we making decisions based on those short-term optics versus long-term impact? And really kind of sit back and go, okay, how are we making these decisions? And having an understanding of that. I think so often you're so busy and you're rolling through some of the your agendas and your things, and you're not thinking about that. And so that's important, as well as to look around and say, who or what is missing from this conversation? And do we need to be considering that? So I think, once again, it's kind of that slowing down of decision making a little bit, rushing through things, and it's just slowing that down and considering that. I think also real leadership requires the courage to do things differently. We're seeing that a lot. We're seeing things just aren't working anymore. So we have to start thinking about how we can do things differently. And that's disrupting things, and that is hard. And that is hard to get people to wrap their head around because, there's always fear in change, and we like our comfort zones. So it takes, and that's where I believe as well, it takes really strong leaders, not just representatives, who are willing to push forward and make some of those really bold changes that we very much need.
I'd like to close with just one more question, if we can, Catherine. That looking kind of into the future, you're clearly passionate about all of this, and some of the terms that you're using around this, like human-centric or authentic leadership, and even just now about some of the fear of change and things like that. How do you transfer that passion onto other people in order to kind of keep this ball rolling or to make it pick up some momentum?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it is stay curious. We have to ask people the questions. We have to, so for myself, when I come up against people who, don't like DEI and think that we need to move into a meritocracy, really just starting asking questions around that. What does that mean to you? That's one of my favorite questions, is what does that mean to you? Because, people don't often realize that a lot of these things mean something different to everyone. And so if we can start to get general understandings as to what some of these things mean and the impacts that they have, then we'll be able to move through this a little bit better. But I think just always talking about it, asking questions, staying curious, and just hoping that people are still open to those conversations and open to understanding. That's a big piece. Yeah.
Catherine, Ian and I both want to take a moment and thank you so much for sitting down with us and talking about leadership and the Elan Project. Thank you so much. And for those who want to learn more about the work that Catherine's doing, you can visit the show notes and find the website and the social media links for Catherine's Elan Project. So please check that out. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you so much for having me. I very much appreciate you guys and all the incredible work you guys do with the podcast and your work.